Speaking of whiteboards and Steve Bannon being out, my next guest says it may have been his own ego that got the best of him. Karl Rove, of course, is a former deputy chief of staff and senior advisor to President George W. Bush. He joins us now by phone. Karl, thanks for coming on.
You bet. Thank you, Sandra.
I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this moment.
Well, look, in a normal White House, if a senior White House aide gave an interview to a reporter from the opposite side of the aisle, so to speak, a conservative White House staffer calls up a very liberal reporter and proceeds to diss his White House colleagues and administration colleagues, contradict the president, both from a policy perspective and a priority perspective, declare that he's going to remove opponents within, quote, enemies within the administration, and, otherwise covers himself with glory, he'd be gone. But this is not the normal White House. And Steve Bannon's relationship with President Trump has been close, and there have been questions, as Brett alluded to, as to whether or not it was better to keep him inside the White House firing out rather than outside the White House firing in. But he's now gone, and it's really a sign of maybe a little bit of normality that that President Trump agreed, or President Trump decided that he couldn't tolerate somebody in the White House who's engaging in such destructive behavior. And it wasn't just one interview. He followed it up with 3 other interviews in which he boasted in one of the interviews that he had given the first interview that was so problematic in order to distract attention from the president's difficulties over Charlottesville. So, it's pretty amazing several days in the life of the Trump White House, and we've seen plenty of weird days, but these are among the weirdest.
Karl, I have to ask a question for the average American who may not even know who Steve Bannon is or what a chief strategist does at the White House. I mean, this wasn't a guy that we heard from publicly all that often, very few times, in fact. A lot of people don't even know the sound of his voice. I mean, how important is this role to the president? And to now have him gone, what is the impact on this White House? This is a significant role for the president.
Well, Bannon's role was essentially to act as the sort of, if you will, keeper of the flame. His job appeared to have been to remind the president and the president's people of what the president had promised to do, and to sort of try and keep the ship moving in a general direction of fulfilling those promises. But let me tell you, I was a senior advisor to President George W. Bush. But Andy Card, the White House chief of staff, told me something at the beginning that has stayed with me ever since. He said, I don't want people whose only job is to walk into the Oval Office and give the president their advice. So you can advise the president as a senior advisor, but I also want you responsible for running things in order to execute the policy decisions that we make. So he gave me several offices that I was responsible for, including one called Strategic Initiatives, whose job it was to work with all other senior White House officials to arrive at a long-term plan for the White House. I think one of the problems in this White House is that Steve Bannon and a number of other officials have no responsibility, or have had no responsibility until now, to do anything except walk into the Oval Office and give the president their advice. And that is a recipe for disaster. If you're not responsible for executing the decisions, you got a lot of free time on your hands and not a lot of responsibility for making certain that things actually get done.
All right. Well, on the phone, we didn't get to see that lovely whiteboard, but Karl Rove, we're always happy to get your perspective. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sandra.